when people talk about alignment of AI, or if it's not put in safety terms, just effectiveness of the thing. The other side of that question of like, what are we aligning them with is pretty dependent on how well we understand ourselves. What do we actually want them to do? And it's the kind of question that can go from looking very easy to looking very hard in a matter of a few years if the technology is moving fast enough. It would be nice if we could bring them a little bit more into balance. I mean, it starts with admitting that we don't understand humans as well as we kind of walk around pretending that we do. There's like a missing science where psychology could be, in my mind, and like understanding the inner workings of the psyche in a more sort of rigorous way.
All right, welcome back to the Human Code. I've got my friend Adam Pelavin here, and we've just been chatting about life and whatnot. And I got to say, Adam, once again, thank you for joining us today. But additionally, I got to ask you, what got you interested in the intersection of humanity and technology?
Well, thank you for having me. Being a human, it goes pretty far back. Because I think I started reading science fiction in like elementary or middle school. I can't quite remember, and that gets you into it pretty quickly. The other thing was I got really into physics when I think I read Michio Kaku's Hyperspace when I was in middle school, and that I was very much a math nerd, and that got me fascinated with physics. And then as I kind of went, it happened that when I was in high school, that was the time that like some of the experiments demonstrating quantum entanglement kind of outside the bounds of measurement error started happening for real. And the field started taking it more seriously. And my thing was, the more I read about like, okay, what does this really mean? The more questions I had, and the more the questions seemed to point at like some stuff about humans and consciousness and how reality comes together that were like not the most comfortable thing for physicists to talk about in the 1990s. And then there are a million threads, right? But I think the other one that's worth flagging is just, again, someone who read a lot of sci-fi. I remember talking to people about, this coming period, back in high school in the 90s. And I mean, even to the point where like you could sort of see that like, oh, there's going to be some pressure to slow down, but then our like major geopolitical adversaries will be going for the same tech, so we probably won't, and that kind of stuff. And then, so I was really primed to be kind of fascinated with AI. And even, there was a point where I thought maybe I should, kind of point in that direction. I was a math major as an undergrad, blah, blah, blah. But
Okay.
I read, in the summer of 2001, I read The Age of Spiritual Machines, which Ray Kurzweil is I think it's the book where he started using the singularity a lot. Like, wasn't his term originally for this, but he really popularized it. And I had a funny reaction to it, I think, where on the one hand, like I was incredibly excited for what this would mean, but on the other, I foresaw a period of great confusion because my sense by that point was there were a lot of deep questions about humans that we were not pursuing with anything near the energy that we were going to put towards pursuing this technology. And I mean, much as, and I thought it was great that we were going to put all the energy towards the technology, but I thought, gee, it might be nice if we could start to understand ourselves a lot better in parallel, because if we don't, like at some point, it's going to start causing confusion about what these things are versus what we are versus, a bunch of things that I think are now much more familiar to people.
Oh, absolutely. So those are great questions to be even asking in like the early 2000s. Because just thinking about like what was actually framed up there, like we're still working with expert systems and in an AI perspective, like we knew about neural networks, we saw some of the ingenuity that they could solve, but we didn't have the compute power, we didn't have the data to actually make them effective. And you're sitting here going, all right, how do we understand ourselves, but also the the machine in that spiritual space. Like what are the big questions that you felt were going unanswered at those moments?
So, I mean, and I should say there's probably some advantage to like not being that close to the technology at the time where it was like,
True.
it's a lot easier to just say, oh, in 2 or 3 decades, it'll get there when you're not grappling with the actual engineering problems that the people with the technology are. Um, so, and I wasn't just math major, I was a pure math major. So I liked thinking in big abstractions. I do.
Okay.
But I was very into literature. I eventually like wrote and sold a novel. And I thought a lot about things like philosophy of mind and going to your question of like, what were the questions I was uh, thinking about? And part of going into college, I thought maybe I would go into philosophy, but I was a bit disappointed by the answers on offer there. And cognitive science was just starting to become a thing. And, at my school, like there wasn't a minor yet. I would have had a minor if there had been one. I took a bunch of the, classes, but my sense of it at the time was like, the pieces weren't quite all talking to each other with the level of fidelity that would be needed to like really start tackling questions like, why do we experience at all? Which I think our attempts at answering that are still pretty crude, and some very real questions about like, okay, um, how does meaning gets constructed, and does it matter that how do we explain the fact that we seem to have agency, that we care about having agency, that that's part of our experience, um, which doesn't really work in a totally mechanistic universe. And these things that can maybe seem very abstract for a long time until they don't. um, uh, you know, a thing I think about a lot right now is, when people talk about alignment of AI, or even if it's not put in safety terms, just, the effectiveness of the thing, whatnot, is uh, the the other side of that question of like, what are we aligning them with, is pretty dependent on how well we understand ourselves. What do we actually want them to do? And it's the kind of question that can go from looking very easy to looking very hard in a matter of, a few years if the technology is moving fast enough.
Oh, 100%. And it reminds me of, I was flipping through pictures on my phone the other day and came across a meme I saved back in 2019 when we were doing, image classification, right? And people were saying the one side of the meme was basically like, AI is going to take over the world. And then on the other side, it's a picture of a cat and it's being classified as a dog, right? And like,
Right.
it's, 6 years time, we've gone from that being kind of like the main problem to now I'm trying to figure out how I can get my AI to write an effective strategy document and go to market plan for the entire business, knowing the context of everything we're doing. So worlds of different in the execution in just a short period of time. And like we've really been framed
Yeah.
in a space where it's an ever evolving scenario of exponential growth, and how big of a change we're going to see in the next 2 years compared to where we're at. And maybe there will be a plateau, maybe there won't, but the questions that you're asking back in the early 2000s, seeing it kind of like come to fruition around alignment, and like how do we actually tacitly use the systems versus what is alignment and how do we know ourselves. um, have any of the questions that you were asking yourself in college been answered for you?
For the most, how do I put it? I think there's been some progress made. I think roughly how I thought 25 years ago, things have gone a lot slower on that front than they've gone on, the side of the actual technology, um, which, is kind of fine. It just means that it would be nice if we could bring them a little bit more into balance in terms of, uh, you know, I mean, it starts with admitting that we don't understand humans as well as we kind of walk around pretending that we do.
Fair.
Um, and you know, I mean, to really put my cards on the table, I think there's been this. Okay, there's I think there's like a missing science where psychology could be in my mind, and like understanding the inner workings of the psyche in a more sort of rigorous way. And there's some practical reasons why that's the case, but there's been a very, to me, kind of odd um, tendency for the last few decades to try and swap in neuroscience for psychology. And we've, you know, and neuroscience is amazing, but it's kind of like if you said you can't study medicine, you can only study molecular biology, like we wouldn't be able to treat diseases the way we do today.
Yeah.
Um, and there is a true practical issue that, like, you know, you can't uh, systematically perturb the human psyche, which is how we study like everything else. Although there may be some ways with, you know, psychedelics and whatnot, um, but that's meant, you know, we can't kind of run at the data there the way we do elsewhere. But at the same time, like, I think that question is uh, getting increasingly urgent.
I tend to agree with you. I mean, we're kind of walking on this boundary as far as like what is the psyche and what is the actual experience of it. And you know, we are an entirely remote team. Our AI is built into our communication tools now to the point where I'm firing off sometimes the same questions to the AI that I'm firing off to the humans that I'm working with, and then kind of knowing the responses because the AI doesn't assume as much context where the human can, and like so you have that rapport built up. But we're getting to a point where that's going to be almost indistinguishable uh, from each other, and like what is the actual experience of an AI in those spaces, and like talking to people who don't really understand the inner workings of how it's actually working. Like they're already at a point of thinking that there is some sort of experience there. When you're like, no, that goes back to the spiritual question of, if when I wake up in the morning, am I literally just downloading all my memories at that point in time and I'm a new experience from that point on? Or do I have that existence prior to that I've gone with? And like, it's a nice thought experiment. I think I know the answer, but I never know that I know the answer. So,
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
sorry if you had something, feel
Oh
free.
no, I mean, right. I mean, there's kind of in some ways like two whole classes of questions here, and I mean, you can kind of go with David Chalmers' framing. I'd like to tweak it a little bit, but there's kind of the hard problems and what he called the easy problems. The
Yeah.
I I like a slightly smoother framing that's just one is you know, why do we experience it in the first place, period, and the other is how do we uh, organize our experience coherently. So like, you know, you wake up in the morning, you have all these memories. It's probably at least efficient most of the time to assume that the through line you see there is correct in some sense. Um,
Yeah.
you know, and you can get to some, I mean, depending on how kind of literal and logically rigorous you want to be, you can get to some pretty interesting places in terms of like, um, we tend to talk about, I mean, people who really investigate this tend to talk about uh, the world as existing as the sort of ground truth and then experiences somehow emerging from that. That is backwards from how we know it. I mean, we have experience and then there are these consistent patterns there, and it tends to be very efficient to assume like those consistent patterns refer to some thing outside of us that has the qualities that we consistently experience in it. But like, there's also a point where it does become like mistaking the map for the territory a little bit. And most of the time it doesn't matter. But when you get to stuff like this, it might.
It's a fair point. I mean, we are. There's an interesting concept that you've brought up there as far as like confusing the map for the territory, and I think we're both kind of creating the assumption that we know that our experience in the human psyche is not aligned with what reality actually is, right? Like we filter everything through that human experience. And so, how is it that we get a better understanding of the human psyche when the filter is always applied? Um, and I think that's one of the challenges of the science of the psyche is like you can never pull yourself fully away from it, except in certain cases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, a thing that you can do. Okay, so like if you're in Plato's cave, right? Like if you're stuck in Plato's cave and like you don't, you can't necessarily, I mean, in the way that story goes, like know what it's like outside the cave, know, et cetera, right? But you can systematically explore the
Yes.
inner workings of whatever system you're like stuck inside of. And we could do that with the psyche. And the other kind of, I don't know, like one neat trick for like thinking about that is that if you're not so attached to the idea that the point of the psyche is that what we're trying to do is reach some external truth outside of the psyche, but rather like understand what's going on within it as applied to everything, right? If you kind of look at like, okay, well, human experience is the ground truth, and we're creating all these models that are very, very useful uh, for understanding and coordinating, within the human experience. Then it starts to then that puzzle of like, well, then how do you like use the psyche to look outside the psyche, et cetera, gets it kind of gets defined away where it's like, well, that's just not a thing anyway. Like this is all patterns inside of human experience, so we're okay.
Oh, it's fascinating.
It's a very like mathematicians kind of trick for something like that.
No, and it is interesting, right? Like, because it reminds me of the question of like, how do you figure out that you're in a 4D universe, right? Like, or are there other dimensions out there? And it is through observation and kind of seeing some of like the mimicry, the trickery that may exist if you kind of like bounce out that way. Um, but then additionally, how do you see, I guess some of these questions playing out in our everyday lives, whether it's in business, whether it's in personal. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so gosh, so many ways. I mean, I'll sort of take like a more everyday human example, so maybe more abstractly, and then an everyday tech example. I mean, so the everyday human example, I'm not going to get into like a detailed one right now, but it's just uh, the there are methods of learning about one's own psyche uh, that go, I think, pretty far beyond anything I've seen in the clinic or I've seen in books and whatnot. I mean, without getting too into detail, like I'm pretty trained in a method with Indigenous lineage, and there are cultures that have built up their own kind of technique around this stuff. Um, that uh, in my experience is very effective. And when you do something like that, you may find yourself uh, understanding your own motivations in a different way, understanding the things you do, even the way your thoughts get constructed in a somewhat different way, and similarly those of other people. And uh, I mean, there are like simple versions of these that still have like tremendous explanatory leverage, like just looking at okay, like the way trauma shapes people, right? The way like aggregate like childhood traumas and whatnot. And it's like it's like a little flattened the way that gets talked about, but still you can get pretty far compared to I think the like heuristics most people use in like very quick ways when navigating the world. Um, really understand like why are people doing what they're doing. And um, it compounds a lot. I mean, the world, it's like it may not make a huge difference in one interaction, but when it starts to be a lot of interactions with a lot of people, it starts to give you a richer picture of the world that starts to look, I think, somewhat different than folks who haven't had those experiences. And then on the well, here I'll pause. You seemed like you were gonna.
And There was this interesting thought that I just had of basically like how much of the world is kind of created top down versus how much of it is bottom up, right? And like our childhoods definitely create the people that we are today, as far as like, or at least the people that we need to learn to let go, so that we can be more of that person that we've always been, right? Like to shed the trauma, to let go of it, to be more embodied in who we are, um, as an essence. And then the other side of it is like we also live in a world that has other people in it, and that has kind of some top down hierarchical dynamics to it as well. But our everyday experience is really determined from that locus of individuality, or at least from kind of that perspective. And so you just got me thinking, and that's really where I was going. So please.
No, I mean but I mean it ties really well back into that. Like your own psyche is like you can't get out from inside your own psyche, right? Like it is the ultimate. I mean, if you're saying that there's an external reality, it's the ultimate filter on that, but it's otherwise everything's just happening inside of that. Um, and stuff like, you know, trauma and various other like really intense experiences and, well done ritual processes can do this too. Um, really, really shape how that happens.
Yeah.
And then, I think I sat on my keyboard and made you disappear. I think you can see me, but
Yeah, I can.
there we go.
So we were on the discussion of basically the human experience is the psyche. Like you kind of experience yourself, and that's like the locus that you have is always kind of filtered out there, but there is that like
Yeah.
external space that does have the kind
So
that entire realm of experience.
yeah, I mean, okay, so here's another one that I've been having some fun playing with. Um, how far can you push language models on writing? Uh, I'm fascinated with this, and I'm fascinated in part because um, there are, uh, I think, a lot of good writers um, just quickly assume that it can't be done well. And I think in a lot of ways, like, it certainly can right now. I mean, well, if you want to have a writer at like be able to write at, kind of world-class level, that LLMs just aren't going to get there.
Yeah.
I think there's some kind of fundamental logic to why that's probably true, the same way, I mean, okay, so then look over in what it's happening with pure math right now. Which is a field that actually involves a fair amount of creativity as well as analytic ability, et cetera, right? And Terry Tao's been doing some fantastic writing and speaking on the subject, and he's an incredible mathematician who's also always been really good at talking about math and writing about it. But I think relative to 2 or 3 years ago, mathematicians have been very impressed with what AI had been like ahead of their expectations, like not outside of the realm of what they could imagine, but ahead of what they thought it could do. And then you go over to writing. And, I think there's kind of a similar thing, and I happen to have backgrounds in both. And I don't think anyone who's kind of making the case that, will or won't be able to do this, has really thoroughly mapped the process of, well, okay, what goes into writing really well. So, and I think there are a lot of situations like that with AI where, trying to figure out what it can or can't do, with enough effort today, and then also what it will and won't be able to do in a few years with these models, and then when world models start coming online in a bigger way, blah, blah, blah. I mean, we can just find out as we go, but if you want to be at all systematic about, and you're thinking about it and you're predicting whatever, which is also a little bit part of my job as BC, you have to probe, what are we actually doing when we do this? Even if it's not going to do it the same way as us, you have to have some sense of like, which parts is it or isn't it replicating well today? And, which of those parts does it seem to be able to improve on, and which of the parts does it not seem to be able to improve on? I have a whole Claude code system that I've set up to try and get it to write. Like there are levels I can get it to write at that do save me a lot of time in my day to day, but to try and get it to write at like higher levels Um, you know, I don't know if it'll get there, but I'm learning a lot about where its, spikiness is as I go.
And I think you're hitting on it. I tell my clients this frequently, and I go, there's three things that AI just isn't really good at today: relationships, creativity, and strategy. And I think that we're making moves, and it's always kind of like extending the envelope of where it is. But also, I find that we'll probably end up seeing AI solve the boundaries of where different disciplines come together uh, quicker than we'll see it kind of like extend the boundary of knowledge and intelligence outside of where it currently exists.
Yeah.
And so if you look at all of our knowledge and all of our intelligence as a circle, it probably looks like a circle from a far enough distance, but as you move in, there's the valleys and the mountains that kind of go. And so we'll fill in the valleys first to extend the mountains and make the circle larger. That's going to be that next effort that comes about, but that's going to come about from figuring out how do humans extend that boundary, how do humans kind of like take that leap, and we'll see that reflection of ourselves in the technology quite possibly. Or we'll see models that can take advantage of where we kind of like fall short in our own understanding, but
Yeah.
still using some of the same processes that extend out. And I think it will be a rather entertaining time to
Yeah.
be seeing, and we'll kind of go from there. But also, I think the other point you were making was around how do we, where do we kind of like learn to see the boundary of like what the tech can do today and where it goes. And I agree with you that many people saying that it can't do something at that level either aren't breaking it down to try to see if you can kind of extend, or we just haven't gotten the right model in place to see how the intelligence can be abstracted for how humanity does it today as well.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, so like, here's a really interesting question. How finite is creativity? Right? Like, how much of creativity is kind of fast permutation of, kind of finite options? In which case, like then the question is like how many options you need and how well you're correlating them and whatnot. But like theoretically, that could be done at some point, well, by a machine, and maybe it's just the numbers get so high that theoretically and practically are still very far apart. But maybe not. Um,
yeah.
Versus is there something a little bit more? Uh, is there something non-computable happening? And that's the kind of thing that can like throw people off because, well, gee, if we live in a mechanistic world, then no, nothing non-computable can be happening. But I mean, a finite mechanistic world. But
Yeah.
That's a great model. It's not necessarily the ground truth of things. Um,
And even when you bring in the infinite world as well, right? Like even if it is computable, we still base our understanding of computation, our understanding of mathematics on assumptions, right? Like you go to Gödel's
yeah,
incompleteness theorem, and like at some point you're kind of making an assumption that this is true, and like we're building on those principles to kind of extend it out. And no matter where we start that at, there's an assumption to be made.
yeah.
And
I mean, so
yeah,
I mean, there's kind of two things here, right? Like one is just quite simply a logical system cannot choose its own axioms, and so any computer, no matter how sophisticated, is ultimately a logical system. And um, what I think what's implicitly being uh, kind of inserted in there for a lot of people is like, yeah, but the axioms are basically just the laws of the universe, and it's not stuff we're making up. Maybe not. Like at no point in human history have we actually known some finalistic. Like that would be the weirdest development ever if we actually were to find that. So best as we know, we are making choices of what the axioms are going to be. That's not
yeah,
informed by either this external reality or these patterns in our experience, whatever you want to say. There's probably not arbitrary, but there's probably some choice to be made.
Well,
Um,
and look at gravity, right? Like Newton created just a fine method of like computing gravity for the time and for the knowledge and extended the boundary of that. But Einstein then, took it to another degree of accuracy and extension on that. And so like we can create models, behaviors, axioms that get us to another level and then allow for more doors to open of the questions that we have available to us and the answers that we can extend from there. But yeah, it is fascinating. Adam, I gotta say, it's been an awesome conversation as always. Like, I love
yeah,
digging into
likewise.
these sides of things with you. One question that I want to like kind of leave the audience with is what, during this time of when we're trying to figure out like what alignment is, what is for us, it's correctness as well, like how we are building things. What are the questions that you're asking yourself both today and maybe for the next 10 years for how either your family members, your children, or anybody else is kind of like walking down this path of where we're at in the life cycle?
I mean, so this is one place where I'm probably, in a funny way, more optimistic than a lot of people who actually believe, like I do, that this stuff's going to continue to dazzle us. Um, where, uh, like the what I think is the good news for now is that the alignment problems aren't so complicated yet, and I'm sure someone listening at a big lab would think that's the craziest thing in the world because a lot of the most a lot of very brilliant people are spending like all their time trying to solve these
Yeah.
things, but they're pretty reasonable to define for now. Like I'm not, it's we're there's still some real like effort wrestling to the ground, but it's there. I think if we see anything like the trajectory I expect over I think we have like the next decade to hopefully quicker and quicker start to understand like the deeper underpinnings of um you know like the deeper philosophical questions, let's say,
Yeah.
um but bring them into a much more pragmatic uh realm as quickly as we can. But I think if we do that, like I think we'll look back in 5 or 10 years and uh this stuff will feel very much like early internet stuff did, say in like 2010, or it's like
I mean, we're of like a very similar age. And so, like, we had high school around the same time, college around this, very maybe a year or two off is what I'm kind of
yeah,
like gathering. And like that early excitement that we had for the internet, and like we basically were at that precipice of like our childhood was spent in the yard, our like outdoors, like we were gone for hours, there was no connection. If you met somebody, you showed up at that time and like had no idea if they were actually going to make it or not, right? And then we moved through all of this change and kind of just adapted our lives to this incredible amount of change happening over the generate or over the decades. And it just seems kind of cool to see that we are going to continue to go down that path of this constant exploration and being there for what is that next thing. And you're right, it does feel like the early days of the internet around like, hey, we know it's going to do something, we know it's going to be amazing, and yet the imagination is limitless on where it could actually go. And I think there is a bit of hope for where it lands.
yeah,
And I think that's a good place to kind of offer. One of my favorite quotes is from Einstein, and it's the biggest question you can ask yourself is the universe a friendly place or an unfriendly place? And so if you find it to be an unfriendly place, you use your effort and technology to separate yourself from nature. But if you find it to be a friendly place, you'll use technology to bring yourself closer to that nature as well.
yeah. Well, hopefully we start to do that a lot more in the next few years. I think we probably will.
Exactly. And I think it kind of comes back to, who we choose to spend our time with and who we choose to kind of like explore these efforts through. So, Adam, I got to say, thank you so much for spending the time today to talk to us.
Thank you.
Really
Thank
appreciate the
you.
conversation, my friend.